Hello everyone. I invite you to continue listening to the horror story, which is thrilling and captivating. Don't forget to give me a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you everyone. Story: The Iron Womb of Chateau d'Amber. Nestled in the forsaken wilds of northern France, where the earth seemed to bleed mist and the trees twisted into grotesque parodies of life, stood Chateau d'Amber, a hulking monument to despair. Once a medieval stronghold, its stones had borne witness to slaughter before being reborn in the 18th century as a prison so vile it was said the devil himself turned his back on it. The locals called it La Tombe de Fer, the Iron Tomb, for no one who entered its gates ever emerged whole, if they emerged at all. By 2024, it was a crumbling ruin, its iron-spiked walls clawing at the sky, its corridors choked with shadows that refused to die. The air around it thrummed with a sickly pulse, as if the prison breathed, waiting for its next victim. I, Elise Moreau, a journalist with a hunger for the macabre, had chased ghosts across Europe, yet none called to me like Chateau d'Amber. Its history was a tapestry of horror. Prisoners flayed alive, wardens drunk on cruelty, and whispers of rituals that defied God and nature. My editor begged me to reconsider. "That place eats souls, Elise," he'd rasped, but I laughed him off. With a camera, a recorder, and a fool's courage, I drove into the fog-shrouded wilderness on an October evening. The date etched in my mind. October 30th, 2024, the night before All Hallows Eve. The road to the chateau was a descent into madness. Gnarled branches scraped my car like fingernails, and the headlights caught fleeting glimpses of shapes, too tall, too thin, darting through the trees. When I arrived, the prison loomed against a blood-red sunset, its silhouette a jagged wound in the sky. The gates hung open, rusted chains swaying as if beckoned by an unseen hand. I stepped out, the wind biting my skin, carrying a faint, keening wail that wasn't quite human. My boots crunched on the gravel as I crossed the threshold, and the gates groaned shut behind me. Not fully, but enough to make my stomach lurch. The courtyard was a slaughterhouse of memory. Broken gibbets tilted in the breeze, their ropes frayed and stained with something darker than time. The main entrance gaped like a maw, its wooden doors reduced to splinters. Inside, the darkness was alive, pressing against my flashlight's beam. The air reeked of rot and iron, a butcher's scent that coated my throat. I set up camp in the central hall, a cavernous chamber with a ceiling lost to shadow, its walls lined with cell doors that wept rust. My recorder buzzed to life, capturing the silence as I photographed the walls. Names clawed into stone, dates smudged with desperation, and one phrase that stopped my heart. Loose sang les nourrit, the blood feeds them. For hours, nothing stirred. I explored the ground floor, my flashlight tracing spiderwebs thick as curtains and floors slick with something that wasn't water. The stillness was oppressive, a weight on my chest. Then, as midnight clawed its way into the night, the prison awoke. A tapping began sharp, deliberate, like teeth clicking on bone. It echoed from the upper floors, a siren's call I couldn't ignore. I climbed the spiral stairs, each step a betrayal of my instincts, the air growing colder, thicker, until my breath hung in crimson-tinged clouds. The second floor was a maze of despair, narrow corridors flanked by cells, their bars bent as if clawed from within. The tapping led me to a cell at the end, its door dangling like a broken jaw. Inside, the walls were a canvas of horror, gouges deep as knife wounds, smeared with a black, tar-like substance that glistened wetly. A pile of chains lay in the corner, coiled and twitching faintly, as if alive. The tapping stopped, replaced by a wet, gurgling whisper words I couldn't grasp, spoken in a throat choked with blood. I thrust my recorder forward, my voice cracking. "Who's there?" Silence. Then a shadow lunged not across the doorway, but through it, a smear of darkness with too many limbs. My flashlight caught its edge a glimpse of flesh stretched over bone, eyes like gaping sores before it vanished. I stumbled back, the corridor warping around me, the walls pulsing like flesh. The cell doors rattled, a cacophony of metal and screams, and I ran, my boots slipping on the slick stone. Back in the central hall, my equipment waited, but the recorder's light flickered wildly. I played it back, and my blood turned to ice. Beneath my voice was a symphony of shrieks, human, animal, neither chanting in unison. Asterisk viens a nous. Elise, come to us, Elise. The gates. I had to reach the gates. I grabbed my bag, but as I turned, they slammed shut with a force that shook the walls, the rusted lock now gleaming molten red, as if freshly forged in hell. The whispers became a roar, shadows peeling from the walls tall, skeletal things with flesh hanging in strips, their mouths stretched wide, oozing black. I pressed against the stone, my flashlight trembling, as the cell doors burst open. Hands rotted, claw-like reached out, dragging chains that slithered like snakes. Time dissolved into terror. The cold gnawed at my bones, and the stench of decay filled my lungs. I crouched in the hall's center, clutching my recorder, as the voices wove a tapestry of agony pleas, curses, laughter that wasn't sane. One voice cut through, low and intimate. Elise, we've waited so long. My name dripped from it like venom. I hadn't told a soul I was here. How did it know? My mind clawed for sanity, grasping at the prison's lure. Francois Leclerc, the warden of the 1790s, hadn't just tortured his prisoners, he'd fed them to something darker. A madman obsessed with eternity. He'd carved runes into their flesh, drowned them in blood-soaked rites, believing their souls would anchor him to life. When the prison fell, he disappeared, along with hundreds of inmates erased from history, their graves empty. Were these his victims, trapped in the walls, or something worse? The hours bled into eternity. The shadows circled, their forms sharpening prisoners with eyeless sockets, tongues lolling like worms, chains fused to their wrists. The air thickened with a floral rot, sweet and suffocating, as a wail rose from the floor, not sorrow, but hunger. I fled to the top floor, the roof half collapsed, moonlight slicing through the gloom. The figures followed, their limbs cracking like dry wood, their hands reaching, brushing me. A touch like frozen razors seared my arm, and a vision exploded in my skull. Leclerc, his coat dripping red, chanting over a pit of writhing bodies, their skin peeling back to reveal something moving beneath. His eyes met mine, and he smiled. I screamed, collapsing as my flashlight skittered away. The prisoners swarmed, their wails a blade in my ears, their fingers digging into my flesh. I curled tight, waiting for the end, but it didn't come. The dawn broke, weak and gray, and they vanished, leaving only the echo of their laughter. I staggered to my feet, the gates now open, and ran, my camera lost, my recorder slick with sweat. I drove home, the road a blur, the tapping following me in my mind. The recording was blank when I checked it. Hours of nothing. I tried to write, but my hands shook, my dreams filled with eyeless faces and Leclerc's grin. A month later, I returned, driven by a need I couldn't name. The prison waited, its gates agape. My camera lay in the courtyard, its lens cracked. I checked the photos and my sanity shattered. The last image showed me in the hall, surrounded by shadows, except now, my eyes were gone, black holes staring back. Behind me stood Leclerc, his hand on my shoulder, his smile wider than humanly possible. I burned the camera, smashed the recorder, but it didn't stop. The tapping grew louder, not from the walls, but inside me my skull, my chest, my veins. Last night, I woke to find my mirror smeared with that black tar. The words, tu es un nous, scrawled in my handwriting. My reflection grinned, eyeless, and I felt my lips move with it. Chateau d'Amber doesn't wait, it claims. And now, as I write this, my shadow stretches too long, too thin, and the tapping, it's calling me home. How did you feel about the story just now? Please leave your comments below. Now, we will move on to a scarier story. Let's listen. Story: The Hollow Choir of La Prison d'Os. In the desolate reaches of Brittany, where the cliffs crumble into a churning sea and the wind carries the screams of the drowned, lies a forsaken blight known as La Prison d'Os, the Prison of Bones. Built in the 17th century as a fortress to cage the damned pirates, heretics, and those who defied the crown, it had morphed by the 19th century into a hellhole where humanity was stripped bare. Its granite walls, slick with salt and sorrow, rose from the earth like the ribs of some ancient leviathan. Its iron gates sealed with chains that rattled even when the air was still. By the 20th century, it was abandoned, its cells left to fester, but the locals swore it was never empty. They spoke of lights that danced in the fog, of moans that seeped from the stone, and of shadows that followed you home. They said the prison didn't just hold prisoners, it kept them, long after their flesh had rotted away. My name is Julian Vasseur, a historian with a taste for the grim. I'd spent years unearthing the dark corners of France's past, but La Prison d'Os was a siren I couldn't resist. Its records were patchy, riddled with gaps, tales of mass executions, of wardens who vanished mid-shift, of inmates who clawed their own throats out in the night. My colleagues called it a fool's errand, but I saw a book in it, a legacy. On November 1st, 2024, All Souls Day, I arrived at the prison with a satchel of tools. A lantern, a notebook, a voice recorder, and a dagger I'd bought on a whim, its blade etched with crosses. The date felt fitting, a bridge between the living and the dead. The journey was a descent into oblivion. The coastal road twisted through fog so thick it swallowed my headlights. The seas roar a constant growl. When the prison emerged, it was a monolith of decay. Its walls pitted and weeping, its towers leaning like broken spines. The gates hung open, their chains coiled on the ground like entrails. I stepped inside, and the air shifted heavy, wet, tasting of brine and something sour, like curdled blood. The courtyard was a charnel pit. Cracked flagstones glistened with a sheen that wasn't rain, and a gibbet stood at its center, its noose swaying though the wind had died. The main hall was a cathedral of ruin. The ceiling sagged, dripping black water that pooled in craters on the floor. Cells lined the walls, their bars fused with rust and something white bone. I thought, until I saw it shimmer, wet and alive like cartilage. I set up my lantern, its light a frail shield against the dark, and began to explore. The walls bore scars named scratched in jagged lines, prayers in Latin, and one phrase repeated endlessly, Lucier chante anchor, the choir still sings. My recorder hummed as I whispered notes to myself, my voice trembling despite my resolve. For hours, the silence was absolute, broken only by the drip of water and the creak of my boots. Then, as the clock struck 3, the witching hour, a sound slithered through the gloom. A low, guttural hum, like a hymn sung through broken throats. It came from below, where a rusted grate led to the prison's underbelly. I pried it open, the metal shrieking, and descended a stairwell slick with slime. The air grew rancid, thick with a stench of rot and salt, and the hum swelled into a chorus, dozens of voices, warped and wet, chanting words I couldn't grasp. The basement was a crypt of horrors. The walls were slick with a pulsing, fleshy growth, veins of red threading through it like a living web. cells lined the corridor, their doors gone, their interiors clogged with bones. Not scattered, but arranged skulls stacked in pyramids, femurs woven into arches. The hum vibrated in my chest, and I saw it. At the corridor's end, a cavernous chamber where the floor was a lake of black water, rippling though nothing touched it. Shadows moved beneath the surface, long, sinuous shapes that weren't fish. I raised my lantern, and the light caught something worse. The ceiling was a tapestry of corpses, fused into the stone, their limbs dangling, their mouths gaping in silent song. The hum was theirs, a dirge that clawed at my sanity. I stumbled back, my foot slipping into the water, and it grabbed me. A hand, cold and boneless, yanked me down, my lantern splashing into the dark. I screamed, slashing with the dagger, and the grip released, leaving a ring of oozing sores on my ankle. The recorder caught it all. My cries, the hum, and a new sound. A laugh, deep and wet, like drowning lungs. I crawled back to the stairs, the water surging after me, tendrils of black lashing at my heels. In the main hall, I collapsed, my lantern gone, my dagger dripping with something thick and green. The hum followed, joined by footsteps heavy, deliberate, dragging chains. Shadows loomed, not human but pieces of them. A torso with arms like whips, a head trailing intestines, legs fused with spines that clicked on the stone. I ran for the gates, but they slammed shut, the chains writhing like serpents, locking tight. The shadows closed in, their mouths opening to reveal teeth too many, too sharp, dripping with that green ichor. I swung the dagger, severing a limb that regrew instantly, its stump sprouting claws. The recorder fell, still running, as I pressed against the wall, the flesh growth spreading to my feet, rooting me in place. The choir sang louder, a hymn of hunger, and I understood. This wasn't a prison, it was a larder. My mind clawed at history for answers. In 1842, a warden named Etienne Duval had ruled here, a butcher who fed inmates to the sea, or so the records claimed. Whispers said he'd struck a pact with something older, something that dwelled in the deep, trading souls for power. When the prison closed, he vanished, the basement sealed. Were these his offerings, fused into the walls, feeding the thing below? The night stretched into agony. The shadows didn't kill me, they played. Hands tore at my clothes, teeth grazed my skin, leaving trails of burning rot. The water rose, lapping at my knees, alive with eyes that blinked beneath the surface. I stabbed blindly, my dagger sinking into flesh that laughed. As dawn neared, the air grew sweet with decay, and the choir reached a crescendo. A single word roared in my skull. Asterisk Julian. Asterisk. I broke free, the flesh tearing from my boots, and climbed the walls, nails bleeding as I scaled the bars. The roof was a graveyard of collapsed stone. The seas roared deafening. The shadows swarmed, but sunlight stabbed through the fog, and they recoiled, melting into the floor. I leapt from the wall, landing in the mud, and ran, my satchel lost, my recorder abandoned. The gates stood open as I fled, the hum fading into the wind. I didn't sleep for days. The sores on my ankles spread, oozing green, whispering that hymn in my veins. I burned my notes, but the recorder appeared on my doorstep a week later, its tape warped. I played it and heard my screams, then silence, then me, singing the choir's dirge, my voice not my own. Last night, I woke to find my mirror fogged, my reflection eyeless, its mouth stretched wide, dripping ichor. The sores have reached my chest, and the hum, it's not outside anymore. It's in me. This morning, I found a bone in my bed, fresh and wet, carved with my name. The sea calls through my window, and my hands move without my will, writing this as the shadows grow. La prison de os doesn't let go, spreads. I hear the choir now, clearer than ever, and my voice joins it. I'm not Julian anymore, I'm theirs.